And from an undisclosed location, welcome to episode 5 of the Dr. Stephen Greer podcast. Dr. Greer, it's great to be with you again.
Good to see you.
Thank you. I know we have so much to talk about.
Yeah.
Yes. So the sort of theme of this episode is the dirty tricks of UFO secrecy. Do you want to give us an intro to the topic?
Yes, I will. First, I just want a few announcements for those of you who will hear this in time. I'm in the St. Petersburg, Tampa area, and I'll be doing a lecture at the Imagine Glass Museum on Wednesday, this Wednesday, the 5th February. It's sold out, but you can get it online, so we can put up how you can see it online. It'll be an hour presentation, a half-hour Q&A with some media there. Also, our briefing document that's been provided to the incoming administration and the president. It is not a binder like this. This is the official one. It's available now for you to order online. It's a print-on-demand version. There's hard copy and soft cover. So you will have everything that people in Congress are getting, except for some sensitive names that we had to redact for obvious reasons. So that is now available, and it's important for people to get that, and if necessary, send a version of it to your 2 senators and your member of Congress as well, so that they're aware that this is the information they need to know. Everything they would need to know is in this. It's about 320 pages. There's a lot on the crash retrievals or government documents selected. There's executive order recommendations, legislation recommendations, a lot of top secret whistleblower testimony in transcript form, obviously, not video. And all the black site locations are in there marked where a lot of the covert programs have been conducted over the last 70, 80 years, including very important current black site locations that have been run through illegal secret government programs, contractors, and government entities that are not answering to the constitutional government. All of that's in there. So it's it's kind of historic. I've never made one of these available since I put the first one together for Bill Clinton in 93 and 94. But I think it's time for people to start seeing how this is, laid out, and it's available for everyone to order right now. We just got it submitted and accepted, so you can order it. The other thing is that we're going to be doing a CE5 cruise out in the Caribbean, April 6th through 12th. It's sold out, but you can get online and see it through webinar. Now, a word of caution. We're going to be using both a Starlink system and a ship system, and they're dead zone. So we're not going to be able to have live transmission the whole time. So we're out there 6 nights out in the middle of the ocean. But if it's not able to be seen live, it'll be saved, and then as soon as we get a good enough signal, load it up so you can see it. So that's available for people who want to participate in CE5 contact under the stars with there'll be 200 of us up on the upper deck of this giant ship. It should be I've never done it. It's an experiment. We'll see what happens. But I've always wanted to do contact using the CE5 contact protocols out in the middle of the dark ocean. So it's going to be an exciting thing to do. And the other thing that we want to put out a call here, and you'll understand this after I get into the rest of the podcast, call for more top secret whistleblowers, either who are currently in operations or have been in the past, whether corporate or governmental, and also people who have specific information on illegal and corrupt activities. And I can't go into why that is, except to say there's a very clear movement afoot to get those resolved. And also the group that is helping with that, I can't say what agency, is able to extend immunity based on cooperation. The other thing is that people do need to contact their members of Congress and get it officially enshrined that there is amnesty, or safe harbor, it was called, that for members of the community that are whistleblowers, but they need to extend that to physical protection like federal marshal protection and witness protection. And also, I think that people need to emphasize that this was in the Senate bill a little over a year ago for the National Defense Authorization Act, and it was taken out by the reconciliation process in the House. Luckily, one of the key people who kind of blocked that had been removed as chair of that committee, the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Rogers, and I think means Turner. And I think we're going to see some progress. So people need to let their representatives know, if you're in the United States, that this is something that's very important. And also to encourage the president to move through the executive orders that we're recommending that involve, number one, the same amnesty and witness protection, whistleblower strengthened protection, and also a pathway for people who are in the senior ranks of those organizations to come forward safely, because they do. There are a number of them that do want to, the really, let's say, high-value whistleblowers. And then also to put in place a law enforcement effort to get the programs that have been run criminally and illegally under proper constitutional control. And that it would be a very, quite frankly, very expensive and technically difficult process for reasons that I don't think we can go into in this podcast. But just to say, the cliff note of that is, I remind people what Admiral Wilson said at the end of the briefing I did in 1997 at the Pentagon. And I asked him, to help us, get this resolved. And he said, look, what I discovered through his inquiries, of course, he was threatened with being demoted and more for doing this. But Admiral Wilson said, what can I do? Because I've learned the best thing I have is a B-2 stealth. And there's an organization that is not responding to constitutional oversight that has technologies that can literally do circles around my B-2 stealth. And he was referring to the alien reproduction vehicles, the reverse engineered anti-gravity systems and craft that are both manned and unmanned. So, this is why he just backed down out of this. So getting something like that under proper control is technically and operationally, let's just say, extremely difficult, and it's why it's never been done. I mean, it's not like you have the normal government of the United States going up against conventional technology systems with an adversary. You're talking about going up against corrupt enterprises that have technologies that are hundreds, if not thousands of years more advanced than, say, the best jet or the best weapon system or the best technology that is in the conventional, legally overseen Pentagon or intelligence budget. So that creates its own set of OPSEC, operational security problems that we're trying to work through and advise on, because we know what those technologies are and what the countermeasures might be, how you counter those technologies. But that's just something that I think people should be encouraging the new administration and their members of Congress, regardless of your partisan views. Our project's always been completely nonpartisan and remains so. So that's just some oversight and announcements. Now, on what this topic is, this may be one of the more consequential, let's say, podcasts we're going to do here, and it's because one of the problems I've encountered for 35 years in meeting with people in government, and also the media, will legitimately say, how could something this important be kept secret? In other words, the fact that it's not the subject of everyday knowledge in and of itself seems unbelievable. And so you have to address that. You have to address what has been the modus operandi, what have been the techniques of secrecy. And we're talking extreme secrecy, right? So go back to 1950 and look at the document, the Wilbur Smith document. We can put it up there. It's in our archive, dpiarchive.com. And that document states, as a top secret document that got declassified out of Canada, as a Canadian document, And it states that this subject is the most secret matter in the entire United States, exceeding the secrecy of the hydrogen bomb. Now, this, remember, is a couple years before we detonated the first hydrogen bomb, which is thermonuclear bomb, which is 100 times more deadly than an atomic bomb like we dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So imagine what kind of interests and things would be done to keep this secret when it exceeded the development of the ultimate doomsday weapon in 1950. So the problem is that those protocols of secrecy, which started out known and overseen by the president and some select members of Congress, took a very bad turn in the late 1950s under Eisenhower's watch, and has never really been properly controlled by any president since then. Even the presidents that have known about it and members of Congress who have, it's not an in-depth knowledge, and they certainly are not controlling those operations, which, of course, in a democracy is anathema and it's illegal, but it's also very dangerous to world security and national security. And this is why I tell people this is the largest national security threat, exceeding Russia, China, Iran, anything in the Middle East, or even terrorism, by an order of magnitude. And I'm not overstating that. So this is what you want to get into. It's like, okay, that being the fact, that's a fact. That document from Canada is a fact. I mean, we'll deal with some facts here. What would they do to ensure that no one breaks this open, except in a fashion they want it broken open, right? So this is why we recently sent out through our email. You should get on our email list, our newsletter list. You can sign up for it at drstevengreer.com for free. And you will get these updates. And we just put in there this 1999 paper I wrote based on what we had discovered between 93 and 99 about the fact that there was a plan to disclose this subject. I think it's going to happen this year, at the latest next, but in a way that pivots humanity against NHI, non-human intelligence, because that was always their long-term plan. So disclosure in and of itself is not helpful if it's a false disclosure, if it empowers a false flag, if it creates global fear through which they seize control of not just U.S. and Western interests, but global interests in sort of this dystopian view that we have to unite as a people against aliens. So that has been the overarching long-term goal of some of this secrecy and a lot of the disinformation and tactics that have been used. And so what I want to go through in the next few minutes or so, 45 minutes, is sort of unpack what all those have been and give you a few examples. I have hundreds of examples of what I'll be discussing. But let's, Michael, here we can put this up while I'm speaking. This document from the 1950s, and where they're talking about having employed or putting on the contract, under contract with the Central Intelligence Agency, CIA, the renowned astronomer Dr. Menzel at Harvard. And it actually describes how he had organized amateur astronomers and others to throw pie plates in the sky, take a picture of it so it looked like a flying saucer. That's what they were called back then. And then have it come out that, oh, everyone was tricked by this. It was a pie pan or something like that. And this is not a contested CIA document. So look at the effect of that. You have a prestigious academic who's been corrupted for whatever reasons, who then is organizing other people to stage ridiculous, hoaxed events so that they can then claim all UFO sightings were pie pans or all UFO sightings were some contrived event. So this is one of the early techniques they began to do, and because they realized that the phenomenon itself, the extraterrestrial craft and sightings that were happening all over the world as we launched into the atomic and the nuclear age, there were just thousands, if not millions of people seeing these things, right? So they had to come up with a cover story. And by employing someone with sterling academic credentials, they can submarine it. They do the same thing with people who have sterling government or military credentials. This is what happened when Lou Elizondo was brought forward as an expert, but his whole mission was to provide part information, part disinformation, steer it towards a national security threat, and also deny that we had these kind of technologies. And the biggest part of the secret, you all know by now, should know, is not the fact that we're not alone in the universe. It's the fact that we have reverse engineered non-human intelligence, NHI craft, ET craft, and have built very advanced aircraft that look identical now to an extraterrestrial vehicle, and that those have been used in all kinds of counterintelligence operations, but also criminal activities. So this is something that has evolved over 70 years. And so we're going to try to unpack some of that.
Great. Yeah. So what are some of the ways in which the secrecy is enforced?
Yeah, well, it goes to the easiest way is to really make the subject the object of ridicule and social opprobrium and laughter, right? Mirth, where it's diminished in its esteem. So the other part of employing academics, on the one hand, to kind of scoff at it, and the other part of it is to be sure there's a lot of buffoonery within what I'm called legacy ufology. People who are out there, doing all manner of crazy things and claims, and those things get highlighted in sort of conferences and films and what have you. But the other part of it is to be sure, like in the days of the National Enquirer's heyday, they were the outlet of choice for UFO cases. New York Times wouldn't cover it. You'd see it in the National Enquirer. And ironically, a lot of those were real events. Of course, they were kind of trolloped up and gussied up in a ridiculous way. But by their being associated with a discredited tabloid like the National Enquirer, or not serious journalism, it tainted the subject. And that was by design, because the founder of the National Enquirer was he was an MIT guy who went on to work in the CIA, wait for it, psychological warfare division. And so it's a PSYOP, psychological warfare operation is a PSYOP. And so you've taken a big picture here. If I give you an example, I had a family member who was with the Boston Globe, a very senior editor at the Boston Globe. And she said, look, even if you put a dead extraterrestrial on my desk, we're not going to cover this story, because we're the Boston Globe and we're a blue chip paper like the New York Times and Washington Post, etc. And I was sort of like, really? No matter what the evidence is? She said, no, because that's the domain of the tabloids.
And Dr. Greer, I confirm that because I unveiled an actual dead alien at a press conference last year, and we had 40 members of the international press, every major station there at the Mondrian in West Hollywood, and we didn't get a single story. They were there filming for 3 hours, and we didn't get a single story.
Yeah, so a lot of people say, well, where's the evidence? That's what we've presented, unbelievable amount of evidence. In our archive, go see it. There was like 115 military and corporate whistleblowers, name, rank, serial number, their testimony, their transcripts. And what's going on in the Congress, they'll have some second and third hand people up there giving opinions who frankly don't know what they're talking about. So this is exactly how this is stagecrafted. I'm going to introduce this word, how you stagecraft it. And the problem is that it's not like everyone has to be a CIA psychological warfare agent or a disinformation agent. You just have to have enough prime movers, influencers, people with great respect, whether it be in government, media, or academia, to torpedo it. And that is exactly what they did. And a lot of money has been put around. There was a member of this covert government program back in 1993, just before I briefed President Clinton, CI director, who told me, this is a quote, he says, we have provided at least $10 million to 10,000 people or more over the years to secure their cooperation with keeping this secret. And, people go, you're kidding. I said, no, that is absolutely true. So between now we get into some of the, how do these people get corrupted? It's blackmail and bribery, and usually both. And if that doesn't work,
carrot and stick, right?
I'm sorry?
Carrot and stick.
Yeah, big golden carrot, great big stick. And if they have to, they can just create false information on the person. Now, everyone thinks the AI deepfake capabilities are all the buzz in the last couple of years. No. Covert programs that reverse engineered interstellar level transdimensional communications and technological systems have had in their black box of tricks extraordinary capabilities to hoax things, at least since the 60s and maybe earlier. So, and by hoaxing, I mean credible documents, credible images, credible video. And this is run on people all the time. I mean, we have seen this with many of our whistleblowers who have been shut down or gone sideways because they've been approached with some kind of blackmail file, even though they didn't do it. And of course, everyone talks about the Department of Justice or FBI or various states engaged in what's termed lawfare now. Nixon did it against his opponents back in the 70s with IRS and the Attorney General. Some people believe it's happened recently as well. But we're talking at a very sophisticated level now where they could, quote, entrap with false evidence almost anyone. And this has happened to a number of whistleblowers over the years and people who had really hard evidence. So that is a very nasty, dirty trick. Now, the other part of it is we have this on you. Let's say you're Carl Sagan. All right. So his very close friend, Carl Sagan, you can look him up, was a renowned astronomer. He sort of started the search for extraterrestrial intelligence with Frank Drake. One of his closest friends is on our team. He's elderly, but he was best man at Carl Sagan's wedding, and he personally witnessed. And this man is an astronomer also, who co-founded the Extrasolar Planetary Society way back 70s or 80s, looking for other planets around star systems. And this gentleman said to me, we have unfortunately gotten Carl as an asset for the intelligence community because they had some dirt on him, apparently some academic impropriety when he was doing his PhD thesis. And they basically said, you'll be ruined or we'll make you rich and famous. Now you choose. He chose to become rich and famous. But he said, Carl, this is his closest friend, I mean, best man at his wedding. He said, Carl aged 30 years in 1 month. This was so hard on him psychologically because he basically had to sell his soul to the devil. And I know so many people like that over my 35 years of doing this, and it's very hard to resist. So let's say you have that kind of file. Remember, J. Edgar Hoover famously had all kinds of files on politicians and stuff, so he could stay FBI director for decades, right? This is a well-known fact. You can look it up. But imagine an organization way above even what J. Edgar Hoover's dirty tricks could be that would collect or create dirt, but also has virtually unlimited money to put on the street to get people to cooperate. And I've told this story. I know the other day I was on a podcast with Patrick Bet-David, and he said, I mentioned I was offered $2 billion by General Stubblebine in 1992. And he said, that's not possible. No one would offer that. Nobody would resist it. I said, well, I did. And it was a serious offer. But the kind of money that they can put on the street ranges a big range. Now, some people may have a $500,000 price tag. I know a ufologist that took about that much just to say things that were half truths. I won't talk about who it is, but it can go up in range. Ultimately, it's about offering people a very big threat or a very big prize to get their cooperation. And if that doesn't work and they're a little too much trouble, they will then engage in wet works, which is a term, wets comes from blood, or they targeted killings or assassinations. And that has happened many, many times. over the years, where people just simply vanish or they're killed in what may look like an accident or commonly a suicide. We know Marilyn Monroe, they made her death look like a suicide, when in reality, if you look at the document that we have signed by James Jesus Angleton III, a few days before they found her dead, Marilyn at that time, Miss Monroe was threatening to hold a press conference to tell the whole world about what Jack Kennedy had told her about the objects from outer space found in New Mexico in the 40s, etc. And, you know, a few days later, she said it was suicide, but all of her friends knew. Like, I talked to the actor-singer Burl Ives, who knew her very well. And he was on our executive committee back in the 90s. And he says, there's no way she killed herself. That was absolutely some kind of murder made to look like a suicide. Now, that's a famous one, but there are a lot of others people don't know about. John Warner IV told me that his grandfather was Paul Mellon, one of the few billionaires at the end of World War II, and was an avid Nazi sympathizer. But at the end of World War II, he went over with George S. Patton and Allen Dulles, started the CIA, to get a disc that was sort of a prototype of an electrogravitic anti-gravity disc from Germany. And it wasn't the ramjet. I mean, there's a different thing. It wasn't the Bell. It was a disc. And General Patton really wanted this to be known to the public because it'd be such a great breakthrough for energy generation and everything else. And they said, no, you won't. He said, oh, we should. And so they created a plausible deniability automobile accident where he was killed in an automobile accident, but it was set up. So this has happened to many people where they're involved in some terrible accident. So this level of criminal corruption, by the way, is going on still today. It's still going on. And that is another one of the techniques that are used. Now this has happened last year to one of our whistleblowers who unfortunately did not come forward because of these complications. Great guy. He was in 2009 on a crash retrieval team in the northern Nevada test area, way north of Nellis, where they used to detonate atomic bombs when they did open air testing of bombs. And it was a helicopter base, a helo base, Delta Force guys and some other people like himself that were deployed initially, he thought, to recover conventional aircraft that went down. Like if a B-2 stealth has classified components, you go and get it so it doesn't fall into enemy hands. And then he was pulled in on the retrieval of the man-made triangular-shaped UFOs that are made by Northrop Grumman and Raytheon and some others that look like a UFO. They're silent except for sort of a transformer sound. And he was called in on a couple of those retrievals. And then the pièce de résistance was he was called in on the slow downing. It wasn't a crash of a large extraterrestrial vehicle. And it resulted in a series of extraordinary events, which we cover in our archive under this particular witness, TE, I believe is his initials in the archive. But as he was preparing to come forward to go to the Senate Intelligence Committee and Armed Services Committee, and then over to the Aero office, a van pulled up in front of his house, and two guys came up to the door, and they said, "Look at your cell phone and your computer," and it was filled with child pornography.
Wow!
And they said, and I'm dealing with this a lot with these witnesses. They said basically, he had two young boys, great guy. But he said, "You're going to either be quiet or you're going to be in prison for the rest of your natural life." And they meant it. Now, is that the only person that's happened to? No, it happened to Bill Holden, who was the JFK chief steward on Air Force One, when JFK told him very directly that he knew about the subject, but quote, "the whole matter was out of my hands, and I don't know why." Bill Holden is that man. He's since moved on, but I mean, he was set up in a similar child pornography. So was Stephen Wendell. He was a military guy who had amazing evidence. He was set up in a similar trap. There are so many of these. So that is a common ruse. Then they have the, it can run the gamut of entrapment. Financial entrapment, IRS bogus events. There's a chief investigator that I won't say who, which committee, but in the Senate, who has had not only the law enforcement sicked on him, but also IRS sicked on him since he started cooperating with us to bring witnesses in and provide that testimony in SCIFs, secure compartmented information facilities up on Capitol Hill. So, there is a long history of this up to the present hour, right? And so one of my grievances, if I want to vent a little bit here, I'll try not to break the leash because I feel strongly about this. Where the hell is U.S. law enforcement, or even state law enforcement? I mean, you have murder going on, kidnappings, entrapment, blackmail and bribery, embezzlement of, over the years, trillions of dollars of federal funds, right? You have human trafficking, drug trafficking, all being done by this transnational corrupt organization. And they're prosecuting what? Nada, nothing. So at a certain point, the other thing that the U.S. public and world community needs to say is, where the hell is law enforcement? If we're not going to have law enforcement against crimes of this nature, up to and including treason, what's the point? Falsely entrapping people like they tried to with this new witness who was on a crash retrieval operation is a federal and a state crime. Now, I'm hopeful, based on some information that I've received in the last day or so, that might actually be getting serious now, where there's going to be some serious look at this kind of criminal activity, including any that are run on me personally, because this is also a common problem. But there are all kinds of techniques like this that they use, and this is not a conspiracy theory. These are facts that we can prove. We have witnesses who can document this and who will testify under oath, but also will provide information to law enforcement. Why aren't the people perpetrating these crimes being prosecuted? Why isn't it even being investigated? So let me open this up to another level. There are certain times where if there's something happening that the organization running these covert sites in various places don't want the public to see, they will also set up a series of false kidnappings and abductions. The legacy UFO subculture calls these abductions. But they're set up by people who are running advanced platforms that are anti-grav, that look like an alien ship, with, in the early days, men that were either had deformities or a very short stature. And it's like Hollywood, where you can make anyone look like an alien on Star Trek or whatever. And they were used to go in and using both chemical agents and directional energy weapons like Havana syndrome, but much more advanced systems, knock people out and abduct them. And they were abducted. People say, I'm an abduction denier. I said, no, I'm not. There was an attempt to abduct me in 1994, but I knew what it was. It wasn't from a non-human source. It was very human, very convincing. And so now, in what jurisdiction in the world would kidnapping and then torturing or injuring someone not be a crime? Pray tell. This is absurd. And so the same thing in foreign countries. We have Jacques Vallée, I've mentioned several times, has the CIA document from 1985, that he gets agitated if you ask him about it. I know 2 other people have this document who won't provide it because of threats. And I think they're threats of entrapment, imprisonment, murder.
I'm working on trying to get it.
Yeah, well,
friends.
If it isn't provided at some point, I think law enforcement will have to acquire it. Okay, let me just leave it at that. So, and that's a bit of a threat. It's intended to be. But look, that document describes the CIA operating these advanced systems, UFO-looking objects and alien-looking creatures, some of which are now robotic, and the really advanced ones are actually partially living. They have a biological. They're like living meat. They're both biological and integrated circuits, and they're man-made. Now, don't confuse that with a non-human intelligence. Although to the unskilled, uninformed person, they are absolutely convincing, 100% convincing. But they use those in Brazil and Argentina. And it says in the document for its psychological warfare value. Yep. So what better way to, if the subject can't be completely kept secret, right? And information spills out, you either taint it by directing it into Kookville, right? Or tabloids, or you create this specter that, well, if they are out there, they're this malevolent force in the universe, and it's just as well we keep it secret. Now, I've had government officials tell me that the words were used, the truth is just too terrible, it's just too terrible about the ETs. Because that person was presented a portfolio of gruesome, I'm saying gruesome, vivisections, people being cut open alive, abductions, cattle mutilations, little villages in developing countries being blown to smithereens by UFOs. 100% of that man-made, but not to people who don't have enough information. So the reason I'm doing this podcast is for the general public, but it's also for government officials, because you need to understand you're not dealing with just normal tradecraft and spycraft here. You're dealing with very advanced technologies that have been reverse engineered for 70, 80 years, and their application in psychological warfare, but also hoaxing these atrocious events. And so these people are real victims, who have been treated this way. And so much so, let's get to another level of psychological warfare technique. And it's the linguistics at the CIA and other agencies for word usage. Now, I'm not going to get into a lot of this. I'll leave that to Noam Chomsky or somebody. But words have meanings. But a word actually conveys a thought. And within the thought is the consciousness and the feeling, both mind and heart behind it, right? So if you label all extraterrestrial contact abductions, boom. What is an abduction? Go look it up in a glossary. An abduction is a invasive, violent act, criminal act of taking someone against their will, right? It's very different from ET contact. So in the 40s and 50s was the era of the contactees. There were a lot of people having contact, and they were not terrible experiences at all. They're beautiful, much like Jake Barber described in his experience with NHI and mine. But when they realized that they had the ability to simulate false alien contact using advanced aircraft, which we had in the late 50s and 60s forward, then they could control the narrative. So then they start changing the words. So flying saucers became unidentified flying objects, even though they weren't unidentified, and they don't aerodynamically fly at all. It's an electromagnetic system. Actually, it's a propulsion system in space-time, but I'm not going to get into that here. Now we have the UAP, as if it's some sort of unexplained and unidentified aerial phenomenon. When it's not unexplained or unidentified, it's not aerial. It's everywhere. It's space, land, water, through other substances, solid matter. And it's not a phenomenon. A phenomenon is something that would occur in nature, like bolide or ball lightning or something. So they keep coming up with these words. Of course, the latest flavor of the month is an NHI, non-human intelligence. Well, how do they go from talking about extraterrestrial vehicles and what used to be called in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, EBINs, extraterrestrial biological entities? That's an EBIN. That's people in these crash retrieval teams refer to them like that, right? All of a sudden, it's non-human intelligence. But wait, word. this is a bit of, excuse my language, a bit of a mind fuck, because there are all kinds of intelligences that aren't human. Dolphins are thought perhaps have higher intelligence than humans. So are we talking about dolphins, cetaceans? There are other dimensions that aren't extraterrestrial, higher and lower. Are we talking about angels, celestial beings, those in the worlds of light who have passed on before us, which is real? I had a near-death experience. Or lower energy creatures, what people would call in religion demons, or lower frequency from another dimension. Well, those are intelligent. So what are we talking about? See, I think there's a deliberate, even the words and the psychology behind the words, the consciousness behind the words, is in of itself a mechanism for controlling the subject and obfuscating, hiding it. So we have to be, I'm very aware of this because I've talked to people who worked in the agency on these kind of issues, and also the Pentagon. And so that whole area of expertise it sounds very esoteric, but it's very profound, because it's how the mind gets colonized, right? It's how it gets invaded and colonized with concepts. And that in those words and concepts is a narrative. So an unspoken, almost subliminal or subconscious narrative. So the word alien triggers almost Pavlovian abductions, right? If you say alien, everyone say alien abduction. Now, that has been done so thoroughly through UFO legacy programs, ufology, the media, Hollywood. It's almost no one even thinks about it and does the sort of deconstruction I'm doing right here. But I think people need to begin to question everything about this, because as this comes forward this year, we're going to have to free the sort of way that we've all been captured and entrapped by a very well orchestrated. And by the way, these people, everyone says, ha ha ha, military intelligence, they don't know what they're doing. Now, the guys at the top of the food chain dealing with this issue, I'll give them kudos. They're genius. They're evil, but they're evil geniuses, right? And they have enormous capabilities to do this. And they are running those games on members of Congress right now. They're running those games on people coming into the administration with false information and false ideas. And it isn't hard to do, because let's say you're a very busy member of Congress or a very busy chief executive, the president or his people. Your portfolio is so jammed packed. So it's very easy to give 1 part information and 9 parts disinformation or spin. And they're at a loss to question it. So this is where it becomes very important for us, the people. It's why we're making this presidential briefing document available to the public, right? Now, if you look at the Disclosure Project witnesses, Jonathan Wigand, he was on the Peruvian-Bolivian border, military guy, and we had knocked down out of the air an extraterrestrial vehicle, and he and his CO were the first to go there and get on the scene. And he describes this craft. He could feel the intelligence inside of it, the people that were extraterrestrial, and a very detailed account. But when finally the security forces that are deployed to retrieve these objects showed up, not unlike Michael Herrera talking about what happened in Indonesia, where they threatened to kill everyone on his platoon were threatened with being killed because they saw this craft that was man-made transporting people, which at the time he thought was drugs, but it ended up being they were innocent people. And what happened is, in this case with Jonathan Wigand, he was told point blank, if you ever speak of this, we're going to know, but we will put you in a helicopter and throw you out of the helicopter into the jungle in Peru, and they'll never find you. And I have spoken to a number of people who've had very credible threats like that. This is not some sort of TV show, folks. And so how much does it take for an average man or woman to endure, whether it be entrapment, defamation of your character, threats, and people who actually are killed before you succumb and say, you cry uncle, right? And that's the problem. So whether it's people in government, military, good men and women who have been threatened this way, civilians like myself, because I'm just an ordinary person doing research on this for 35 years, everyone has this thrown at them if they're going to be a problem for both the details of the secrecy, but also in the criminal activities, but in particular, operationally, something like what Jonathan Wagan said, where we knock down this craft and probably terrible loss of life, and other sort of operations. I think of all the operations where the men that I debriefed who have been operational, have been threatened, have been the use of these craft, man-made UFOs, in human trafficking, gun running, chemical weapon running, and drug running, and the people who are in charge of operational abduction systems, where they have abducted people and what the details of that are. I debriefed a man who was a physicist who was flown into a base in the center of Australia, who, very brilliant man. And he went into, it was on a helicopter, went in what looked like the side of a hill or mountain. And that was actually a hologram. Went in, landed on a big platform, and then went underground. And they were manufacturing, he said, like sausages coming off a conveyor belt, the man-made program life form aliens that are used in abductions. And he knew all about how those systems worked. But he appeared with two security people behind in a room after I gave a lecture up in the Pacific Northwest. And the fear was palpable. So, but he said, I think you need to know this. Now, at the time, he didn't know I knew that that's what most of these abduction protocols were, that they were man-made and how they were doing it. And so he described it to me, and I said, yes, I've heard this from a number of people. But we need whistleblowers like that. I'm putting out a call right now. There is a system we can put you in that will immunize you if you've been involved in that. But and we need you to come forward to expose this fraud, because it's a hoax being perpetrated on the public, which is bad enough. But it's also, remember, it's also the way that they're controlling world consciousness on the subject at the very time we can't afford that false narrative of an alien threat, as Werner von Braun told Carol Rosin, is happening. As this happens, now we have to get serious. And we need people to pull the curtain back on this weird Wizard of Oz, pulling all the levers and whatever, scaring Dorothy and the scarecrows. The public have been completely manipulated on this, but I can tell you, so have presidents, and so have members of Congress, and so have people in the media. So much so, Tucker Carlson is now saying that these aliens are demons and are, from Satan or something. Which there may be demons and things. And let's not forget another trick. And this gets into some really high-tech, weird stuff. So years ago in the 90s, I found out that this whole area of science is called WSFM, weird science and frickin' magic. I met an engineer with Northrop Grumman once. He just said, we just call it pure effing magic, but same thing. And it's a very high voltage electromagnetic systems that can create phenomena like Skinwalker Ranch, Bradshaw Ranch. That's not alien. That's covert, very advanced electronic systems piggybacking on an extra dimensional phenomenon, not extraterrestrial. So remember, you have the man-made UFOs and ETs, you have the actual ones from other planets and star systems, and you have this weird stuff from other dimensions. Those three. And you have to keep that in your critical thinking as you evaluate every case. But everyone's heard of the weird things at Montauk. It's like I never saw the series called Stranger Things. It's sort of based on that. And I was talking to a physicist once who had a donut-shaped toroidal system that was very high voltage, certain frequencies, and they would hit a certain frequency. And into 3D, meaning running around in the lab, would be some spooky creature that looked like it was pulled out of the ninth ring of hell, like some kind of demonic thing. And of course, this sounds like science fiction. I wish it was. So that capability exists and has been used to deceive people. Some years ago, our team, we were doing CE5 contact out in Joshua Tree, and not at the house where I was staying, but other members of the team were saying there was this strange thing that could be easily mistaken as an ET that climbed up on the side of the house and on the roof and was banging on the window. And it looked like some really scary thing. And that was one of these creatures that had been unleashed by the intelligence community.
Was it like a skinwalker?
No, it was maybe a 3 or 4 foot, a strange, hairless, scary looking creature, but it was 3D. It was flesh, but it was not extraterrestrial. It was, and we knew that. Luckily, that team had been on enough expeditions to understand the difference between the fakery and the real thing. But put yourself in the position of a president or a member of Congress or a general person in the media or the general public. All of this is already in the public domain as disinformation, false information. And unfortunately for us, on the side of trying to expose the truth, I was told this in 1991 by a CIA officer. He said, yeah, all that's true, but the truth is more bizarre than the fiction and less believable. And the fiction is what people will believe, because the truth is really more bizarre than any fiction you could make up. So that's just a fact. And that's a really key way that the secrecy has been maintained, actually, is because, let me take it one more notch. Let's say you're somebody in the media, legitimate, or you're someone in political office, and you have all this stuff thrown at you. I've had more than one member of Congress say, I don't want to deal with this. It's too complicated. It's all over the place. I can't figure it out. So in other words, it becomes such a cacophony, a chaotic message of different things and different phenomena that they have no expertise in, that they can't find the needle in the haystack. You know what I've likened this to over the years is that the truth about this is a beautiful gold nugget, that we're not alone in the universe. There are these advanced technologies that would give us a new civilization without pollution or poverty. That's what The Lost Century, that documentary, which everyone should go see, is about. But that little gold nugget has had expertly a mountain of fool's gold dumped on it. So now you're looking for the real thing amidst this plethora of false events, faked encounters, et cetera, and so on. And, those are all ways that you can keep something secret, because at a certain point, at an executive level, people go, this is too much of a mess. I don't want to deal with it. Just kick the can down the road, right? The other big part of this that's maintained the secrecy is not only are these guys had false information thrown at them who are in senior political Pentagon intelligence systems that are not part of this criminal organization, but then they realize what the implications are. So the implications of this itself, those implications are a barrier to disclosure. What do I mean? One of the things that came out in the questioning I had day before yesterday with Patrick Bet-David, and he was talking about the technologies and the Secrecy Act and what these technologies. He says, well, nobody will ever let those out. Not the things that are anti-gravity; those should be kept secret for a while. But the free energy, the 0-point quantum energy, because it's going to impact all the oil, all the public utilities. It's just huge financial. I said, yes, it's got to be done. It should have been done over 100 years ago, but it hasn't. And his immediate perspective, which is what I've heard 100 times, now, the implications are too vast and too serious to ever let this out. And so, of course, my reply was, well, we're going to stay on an 1800s energy system until the whole biosphere collapses and we have more than half the population in terrible poverty and engaging in revolutions and terrorism. I said, this is not the way to run a planet. But when you look at it, you look at the implications of this. If you say that these are extraterrestrial vehicles from other star systems, every scientist and engineer is going to say, how are they operating? And when that gets asked, it will be answered. And when it's answered, it's the end of this 200-year carbon-based industrial era centralized energy system. And we'd move into something where every home, car, whatever, would have its own energy pack, tapping into the space-time around it with, quote, free energy, no cost, no pollution. Now, that's a very good thing for 99.9% of humanity. It's a very bad thing for a certain oligarchies that are involved not with billions of dollars, trillions and hundreds of trillions of dollars. Nobody cares about, the kind of wealth like Mr. Musk has, the 250 billion. That doesn't move the needle. Trillions and trillions and hundreds of trillions does. And that's what we're talking about. Now, people say, well, you're making an argument for keeping this secret. I said, no, I'm not. I'm making an argument for courage and vision. And that these systems have to come forward if we're going to go forward as a civilization. But it needs to be done in a smart way. So you don't bring out the anti-gravity systems right away, because that can be missile delivery. The energy systems need to come out in the safest form possible. But even that is a 15 or 20-year endeavor. Think about it. On the road, we have 1.5 billion motor vehicles. We only can create 100 million vehicles globally a year. That's 15 years to convert them to something that is a really clean, sustainable system if we snapped our fingers and that started happening tomorrow. So we're really looking at 20, 25 years. Same thing for people's electricity for their homes or factories or businesses. This is heavy industry. This doesn't happen on the turn of a dime. And so if we're going to really have a future for my children and my 12 grandchildren, we're going to have to deal with this. But it's going to take courage. And it's going to be saying there are going to be winners and losers in this, but that can be managed. So the stakeholders in the current energy system should be brought over and encouraged to get on the ground floor of this energy revolution, which actually, it's like the internet created, uncounted trillions of dollars in revenue and millions of jobs worldwide. And no one knew that when it first came out. This will be that even bigger, because you have 3 billion people on the planet don't even have energy to cook their food. So there is a massive jobs and economic opportunity here. But if you're only looking at the next quarterly report or a 6-month window, you're going to say, oh, we'll just keep it quiet, right? Because change this big, and I've said this for a long time, people who with a lot of power don't want change they can't manage. And this is a big change. But it's been forestalled since before I was born, right? And so we're running out of time to make this transition. And I know we can make it, but it needs to be on multiple fronts. It needs to be on the energy front, disclosure. It needs to be on peaceful contact with these civilizations rather than knocking them out of the sky. And it needs to be on correcting a very small but powerful criminal group that's running these related programs. And that can happen, but we're going to have to come together and do it intelligently and be smart about it.